let's not take credit for our father's good deeds. So why do I call the R1B haplogroup a Semitic haplogroup? And look, as soon as you say Semite or Semitic, a lot of simpletons get triggered. Why? Well, probably because they're racist. It is my opinion that your genetics, your DNA, do not predetermine the quality of you as a person, right? We all have free will and we get to choose to be good or bad or somewhere in between, okay? Whatever we want. However, at the same time, I can't just completely ignore what genetic DNA studies have shown us and how these lines, however, fluid and not very clearly delineated, how these lines, these genetic lines, align with the conflict that has been plaguing Europe for a very, very long time. Why is it that the Berlin Wall, right, smack dab through the middle of Germany, very neatly, not that neatly, but clearly divides R1A from R1B? Well, why is that, right? And what was that conflict sold as? Obviously, it was all in reverse, this Semite versus Aryan, because it was the Semites calling themselves Aryan and exterminating the Aryans, while everyone is saying that they did that to the Semite. Nonsense, right? Pure nonsense. But you got to cut through the BS and see that every good lie has a lot of truth to it, too. So to just sit there and ignore the fact that the Berlin Wall does exactly what it does and how it delineates people who have slightly different genetic origin, right? I mean, you'd have to be naive or ignorant or whatever. But again, your genetics do not determine who you are insofar as the quality of a person that you are, right? So don't get me wrong. And just for the record, I have very good reason to believe that I personally am R1B. And no one is, a pure Aryan or a pure Semite. Probably not. Or very few people, if anybody. So, you know, I'm not trying to make this a racial thing. It isn't a racial thing because Aryans and Semites are all white people. They are all descendants of Noah. Something like, I don't know, 7,000 years ago, right? Even if you believe evolution, for which you don't have any evidence, any convincing evidence, um, you know, is that long enough for white people to turn into non-white people? Stop it, okay? Semites, Aryans are all white people. That's why you have red-haired Semites. That's why you have blonde-haired Semites. That's why you may get dark-haired Aryans. Anyway, when you look at the British Isles, right, with there being lots of evidence of the Isles being settled by Mediterranean people, people from the Levant, even maybe North Africa, you see that the west coast of the Isles, along with France maybe, you'll see that the R1B concentrations are highest there, right? So where did those people come from, right? Unless you believe they sprouted out of the earth there, for which you don't have any evidence, and the evidence is quite strong that they came from somewhere around here, right? Probably by way of the Mediterranean, Africa, and around, seeing as they were sailors, right? Seafaring generations. If the idea is that R1B it did come from here, right? That it came from here through here. Okay, how do you explain that the highest concentration of R1B is on the west coast, right? And then it thins out as it goes more inland into continental Europe? That doesn't make any sense. And if you look at R1A, it's most concentrated here, and it thins out as it gets, right? So the Aryans primarily came overland, it would seem, into Central and Western Europe. And the Semites, well, they came from where the Semites come from, right? Here, all this. And most likely by sea, primarily anyway. And I mean, how do you deny that, right? Looking at where they are mostly concentrated, this R1B haplogroup. But I mean, ultimately, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all descended from the same tribes, the same protoplast, whatever. Okay? It's our leaders to whom these bloodlines are most important, right? And that's how they rule the world. Anyway, the reason why I call this haplogroup Semitic is because it aligns also neatly with the Semitic, as Theo Vanneman called them, or languages that were influenced. It's a theory, okay? It's just a theory that were influenced by Semitic languages. And there's lots of evidence for these people coming from the Mediterranean and Africa and the Levant into the British Isles, right? But if you look at all these Semitic languages and how there's evidence of them mostly on the west coast of the British Isles, with this with this influence waning as you go more toward continental Europe, as you move east. I mean, how do you ignore the fact that that aligns perfectly with the R1B haplogroup, right? And one last thing that's been blowing my mind for a long time now. How along with this R1B haplogroup, there is a major language shift, right? Alongside the Berlin Wall, more or less. Or today what is the border between Poland and Germany. All these languages are related, right? Make no mistake, right? They're all Indo-European languages. But all the Slavs talk kind of similar, and even the Greeks, there seems to be a continuity between the Polish people, let's say, and the Greeks. Right? The language changes gradually, and it's still kind of similar, right? So you could go all this distance from, let's say, Poland to Greece, and the language won't change as dramatically as it will just crossing over the border, just going a few kilometers from Poland to Germany, right? So there had to have been strong influences from somewhere else. And it makes perfect sense, right? These people came from the sea. These people came overland, and they clashed. And that's why Europe looks the way it looks, why it sounds the way it sounds. And I can't just sit here and ignore the correlation between these Semitic, if you will, languages that whose structure seems to have been very much influenced by Semitic languages because it's damn near the same, not to mention other similarities. It's not just VSO word order. There's a lot of similarities, even when it comes to the phonetics and the guttural sound that I've talked about in the past, right? Versus a completely different sounding and a very, very different language to the east of there, right? This is where they clash. And they've been clashing there forever. So there's linguistic, genetic, archaeological, whatever evidence of that I just cannot ignore. So that's my hypothesis. R1B is a Semitic haplogroup, okay? Because all the evidence seems to support that. And that's my video, I guess. Let's not blame our brothers for their father's sins.